Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us for what is the second installment of our Expert Insights series, Unlocking Success in Product Marketing, presented by Eric Schwei. My name is Brian Gutierrez, and I develop and manage new programs for UW Continuum. Before we get started, I'd actually like to talk a little bit about UW Continuum College because we have a fascinating history that dates back to 1912. And since then, we've worked to expand the University of Washington's educational impact by meeting learners where they are in life and wherever they intend to go beyond that. And so, to that end, we strive to provide relevant educational experiences with the aim that everyone can access the knowledge that they need to have a greater impact in the world. And you can see at the top of the screen how the span of our programs from UW Youth and Teen through UW in the high school and our international and English language programs to our degree programs and finally Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, how these programs do just that. They meet learners where they are in life. The Expert Webinar Series is born out of the great work from these talented instructors of our professional and continuing education programs. So these programs offer learners options ranging from certificates to degrees and courses, where learners experience rich built-in networks of industry professionals and participate in practical, up-to-date hands-on experiences. And the variety of delivery formats make it possible to learn anything virtually anywhere. So it's true that whatever you set out to accomplish, whether it's upskilling, reskilling, or delving into an entirely new field, there's a class for that. And most importantly, there's a path for you. As I mentioned just a moment ago, our Expert Series is a free webinar series where our instructors share what's trending in their fields, the tools you need to be successful, and actionable career advice that will help you stand out in the job market. So please stay tuned for more webinars from this series in the coming months. And for this webinar, just a quick reminder to please enter your questions for Eric in the Q&A, and then he'll answer them at the end of the presentation. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for tonight's Expert Insights series, Unlocking Success in Product Marketing, Eric Schwei. After graduating from CU Boulder with an undergraduate degree in marketing, Eric started his career working at ad agencies in the media buying and analytics department. He then decided to pursue his MBA at the University of Washington to expand his marketing and analytical skill set and landed a role at Microsoft as an analytics lead for Windows.com. A few years into the role, Eric wanted to get back into marketing and was able to position himself as a data-driven growth marketer on the Bing product marketing team, and he never looked back from there. Eric is now a senior director of product marketing at Vivant, where he leads product marketing for product launches. Eric, take it away.
Great. Yeah, very excited to talk to you all today. So just a quick overview on on some of the topics we want to cover today. First, let's talk about, what the heck is this thing called product marketing? There's a lot of confusion around this. It's a pretty new field. So really getting into some of the nuances of product marketing, how it overlaps with things like product management and other departments in marketing and whatnot. Then we'll talk about some of the core deliverables of what's expected of a product marketer, things like messaging, value proposition, positioning, etc. So we'll dive into that topic really quickly, and even show you how you can apply things like all the latest and greatest from AI to actually help you gain insights and really master those skills. Then we'll shift gears and talk about the product marketing job search. I know that this is something that's in getting, gotten a lot more difficult over the last, couple years, and something that I've talked to a lot of people about. So really talking about how can you market yourself? How can you job search like a product marketer? How can you apply some of the things that we actually covered in the previous, in that second section to really help you stand out in the job market today? And then finally, we'll do a quick overview of the Product Marketing Foundations course that is going to start later in late January. So before I begin, I just want to also highlight, do we create this content? Why did we create this course? So, um, when I graduated from my undergrad in CU and then my also even my MBA program at UW, I felt like when I went into a product marketing interview, like I wasn't quite or adequately prepared to really nail that interview. Even with a lot of preparation, there's a lot of things that a lot of tools that I wish I had looking back that would have helped me stand out in that job search and really help me really feel confident during those product marketing interviews because they're really looking for a specific skill set. And also, more recently, now that I'm interviewing a lot of young product marketing talent, there are a lot of candidates that are incredibly bright and have a ton of potential, but I still realize that they lack those skills and they'll need to be coached and mentored to really develop some of these core product marketing skills. So really seeing this gap in the market, this course is really trying to, give you the tools that you need to really nail the job, be really prepared for the interview, and then hit the ground running, or if you're already enroll, hit the ground running to really be able to take on a lot of these tasks confidently with product marketing. So just wanted to give that quick plug before we get into the nuts and bolts of it. So really quickly, let's talk about product marketing. This is a relatively new field that's gained traction over the last 15 years. And really is created to address the unique needs of marketing more technical products and for tech companies. One of the questions I get all the time is, what's the difference between product marketing and product managers? I often get this from my product management partners that I start working with. And really, in my experience, the easiest way to think about it is that the product manager is the CEO of the product. They own the P&L of the product. They coordinate with all the teams to bring the product to life. They create the requirements of that end up being, bringing that product into its form, and they partner really closely across the organization to bring a product to market. The product marketer, on the other hand, is the CMO of the product. They're in charge about how we communicate, how do we message the product, how do we talk to customers to really highlight, which are the features that we really highlight so it gains their attention and really, clicks in their head on, what kind of problems that this will solve for them. They work with product teams to make sure that there's product market fit. So meaning that the product is actually delivering on that promise, delivering on the promise, the value that you want to have in your messaging that will get someone to lean in and get someone to learn more. We'll talk about this in a little bit. And it also includes things like, making sure that we're positioning the product correctly, including how we're pricing the product, how it's being distributed, how it's being purchased, and and a lot more. So really, there's the overlap between product and product marketing and product managers is the whole definition of product market fit. PMs and PMMs need to work together to understand who the product is for and how it's addressing it better than the alternatives. So, and PMM is shorthand for product marketing manager. Another question I always get is like, how technical do you need to be as a product marketer? So again, this really spans the gamut. I think there's definitely a lot of product marketing roles that demand a lot more technical expertise, and some that really you just need to know enough to be dangerous. But I stole this slide from Microsoft. This is really just at a very high level clearly articulates sort of this like diminishing amount of technical knowledge needed across from engineering to product managers to product marketing all the way down to product comps. I like to say that again, you need to know enough about the technical side as a product marketer to be dangerous. You need to be able to translate the technical benefits into customer friendly language. And then you need to be able to coordinate that across marketing, like the rest of the marketing organization, sales, even people like customer support and whatnot, to make sure that they really understand how to speak to the value of the product that you're building out there. And then this is a good segue to talk about what are the skills that are really critical for a product marketer. We'll talk about this a little bit more down the road in the job search portion, but really product, I think of it simply in these two high-level buckets, the need to have and the nice to have. Product marketers need to have the ability to identify, customer needs, be able to understand their perceptions and their preferences, and be able to communicate that to help influence the product roadmap, and also translate that into connect the dots between what the product is delivering and the benefit and how they sort of address those needs, preferences, and pain points. A lot of this involves a lot of customer research. And then with this research and with these insights, you land things like positioning, value proposition, and messaging. And that's a really core skill and one of the key deliverables that you actually drive as a product marketing manager. Product marketing managers also need to have the ability to understand when you don't, whether or not you've achieved that product market fit. There's a lot of times there's a lot of responsibility actually for product marketers to, sort of pull the end on cord of like, hey, the product that you're trying to launch, we're not seeing a lot of product market fit, meaning customer is not resonating with customers. Customers are not lining up to buy this product. Is there something that we can do to course correct to make sure that we can get a product that gets people excited that will actually succeed when we do the go to market? And that's, a core responsibility, something that is usually demanded of senior product marketers and up. Related to product messaging and value proposition, you need to be able to work with sales to effectively create sales assets and train the salespeople how to talk about the product portfolio effectively. Really get them steeped into and deeply empathize with the customer and really understand which product to pitch when. And then finally, one of the core deliverables or responsibilities of a product marketer is to drive the go-to-market. So really coordinating across the entire organization, anything that has a customer touch point, the website, social media, anything like that. You really need to own those things, make sure that everything's aligned for a successful product launch. The nice to skill, the way to think about the nice to have bucket is the more of these you have, I think the better you can stand out in a job search. And also these really come in handy when you are looking to advance your career. So again, you don't need to be any of these things, but such as like a creative, a copywriter, or really having a creative vision. But it really does help if you can work with copywriters, work with art directors to translate the vision in a compelling way and help them and enable them to tell stories instead of recite features. One of the adages that I say probably way too often, my team hates it, but if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Successful PMMs really are good at being able to set goals and measure the impact of a go-to-market launch and understand how it impacts the business bottom line. This is incredibly helpful when you're trying to, during an interview or when you're creating resume bullet points of not only showing, what you need to go beyond what you do or what you're responsible for, but really talk about what you've achieved and how that's impacted the business. So, it's a really, really critical skill. Things like behavioral science and things like that, especially when you're working with free products, free to try, freemium business models. Those are really helpful of helping you create like the engagement and getting customers to try and use your product and create that durable relationship with them. And then finally, I say that one thing I learned a little bit later in my career, but finance is the language of leaders. In order to really be able to talk with people at the high, the VP level and up across organizations, you really need to be able to understand finance in a way. So it's a universal language that gets your work prioritized. So this is the framework that we built that actually served me well in my career. And also this is the framework that I used to create the syllabus and the modules for the course. It's really helps you think about a marketing strategy end to end and actually really maps well to a go-to-market launch plan, something that you would present to a VP of marketing to get the approval of launching a new product, right? So really it starts with you have to start up front with the strategy. You have to really have a good understanding of what's going on in the marketplace. You always start with the customer. What is the customer preference? What's keeping them up at night? What do they like and dislike? What are related to whatever problem you're trying to solve? You have to know your competition. What are they known for? What are they great at? What do they suck at? What are the things that they have cooking for next year that might come into play? And then you also have to have a good pulse of what your company does well and what it doesn't, right? You have to be rooted in that reality in order to come up with good marketing strategy. The next part is being able to then identify who your target audience is. If you're going to go to market with something, you have to know who it's for, what needs it's addressing, and how it's different from the why they should pick your product over the competition. So really having a good idea of customer segmentation, finding those key target audiences, and then leading into positioning, value proposition, and messaging that really leads into is like the gateway into the sort of what we call the 4 Ps, but really the go-to-market plan. So this is a framework again that really helps you think about problems end to end. There's obviously a lot of nuances within each of these buckets, but which the course goes one by one and gives you sort of shows you the tools that you can use and how to think about them and how you can apply them to real world problems. So let's switch gears and talk about core product marketing deliverables. These are things that new product marketers right off the bat are expected to be able to do to add value to the organization. And before we even get into the deliverables, really good marketing comes from good insight, right? Good research, good empathy of the customer, knowledge of what's going on in the marketplace, everything that I said in the framework slide. So the ability to uncover strategic insights and apply them on, and how is that going to change how you bring a product to market is it's probably one of the most important skills that you can bring and develop over time. So let's talk about what a key insight is. A key insight is an actionable finding that stems from triangulating various parts of market research that helps you identify who your product delivers disproportionate value to in order for you to dominate that part of the market and really own that space. So the next question would be, how do you uncover key insights? These sound really nice. Everything I said in the previous slide sounds great, but it's really easier said than done. And this is actually a great slide, a great sort of visualization of how like a really valuable key insight is. This is from Forging an Ironclad Brand by Lindsay Peterson. She's actually based in Seattle. But really, it's trying to understand what your customers care about. What are the things that are important to them? And then really understanding what your competitors do well, but also where are their shortcomings? Where are the areas that they don't invest in, or what are areas that they just aren't very good at? And then doing the same for your own company, really understanding what your company excels at, where are your competitive advantages, and where are the areas where you need to catch up. The uncommon denominator is that space between, again, what your customers care about, the important things that your competitors suck at, that your company does well. If you can really identify those key nuggets, that is the basis of a really insightful, marketing strategy. So just to show you some examples of what this might look like. So love it, hate it, or whatever, but the Cybertruck, Elon Musk was a big proponent of this. When they were developing like a strategy, how do they break into the pickup truck market? The key insight that they found was pickup truck customers are fiercely loyal. A Ford or Chevy owner will always be a Ford or Chevy owner for the rest of their lives. So based on that, why go after these really hard to win over customer segments? Why don't we build, they decided to build something for people who can benefit from the utility of a truck and also probably the prestige of something that looks very different, but currently aren't pickup truck owners today, something that's called non-consumers, right? So how do you create a new marketplace or a new segment of customers that you wouldn't have gotten previously? Another example is, and this is a little dated now, but the Microsoft Surface, right? They had the insight that a lot of mobile professionals were bringing both a tablet and a laptop every time they travel, right? And it created a lot more clutter, created more charging dongles to bring, and everything like that. But they wanted the flexibility of a tablet while the productivity of a laptop. So how do you fuse a device that that is of a tablet that can replace your laptop? So they only need to bring one device. So they really focus on that insight to bring that product to market. So now that we sort of talked about what a key insight is, what is the first step of uncovering that key insight? Again, I always think that you should start with the customer, right? You need like it's the most ubiquitous way to do that, in my opinion, is just talking to customers one-on-one, something we call in-depth interviews or IDIs. IDIs really often start at a very high altitude, right? They start with, really open-ended questions that ask about their day-to-day, their job responsibilities, or their home responsibilities, depending on the context. And then starts narrowing in towards the problem, the problem space that you're operating in. So really asking them more specific questions about how they address certain problems, what kind of solutions are they using, or what kind of workarounds are they using, what do they like, what they dislike, and whatnot, all the way down to then even getting deeper into like asking about specific brands, perceptions, and even showing like ideas of concepts and seeing whether or not they resonate with them. But the goal here is to really want to explore. That's why you start at the high level to really try to find new findings or insights that you may not have had before. But then you should also have a couple hypotheses you want to prove or disprove going into these in-depth interviews. And really, this is an incredibly powerful tool to really gain, help you gain that customer insight, right? Um, and then one of the things in my experience, I've seen a lot of product marketers, early in career product marketers, take charge and try to drive, customer research, in-depth interviews and whatnot, but then they get hung up on the discussion guide. And I think this is where, generative AI is such a game changer now for product marketing. It helps you get unstuck really quickly. It doesn't solve the problem. And I don't think it'll create the best, most robust discussion guide ever. Maybe in a few years, who knows? But currently, but it really helps you get 60% of the way there in a matter of seconds, right? So one of the things I've added here is just, and what it's just like a quick little Mad Lib type of template of what you can use to put into ChatGPT or Gemini or the generative AI of your choice to really help you just get that high level discussion guide. I use this prompt all the time. I actually just conducted a bunch of interviews probably 2 or 3 months ago, and this was a huge time saver just to get the momentum going of building that initial skeleton framework of a discussion guide. And then that allows you to work and collaborate with all your partners to fill that in. So, um, and then I also think that you can use AI to stress test a discussion guide. There's actually some fascinating research done by a professor from Wharton that actually shows that if you can actually interview ChatGPT, if you give it the right context, and the responses it gives you is almost as good, are actually in some scenarios just as good and in predictive value as interviewing a person with the same characteristics, meaning that this is a very low cost way and a quick way to stress test to make sure that you have the right discussion guide, that you can hit the time, and also to even get some initial insights that you might not have otherwise been able to do. So again, this is another Mad Lib type of template you can use to get started on doing some of that sort of AI research. And then, before I always have to put in a word of caution with generative AI. People, a lot of times people still don't understand that generative AI is a probabilistic model, really just to train to give you an answer that satisfies you, not necessarily that is factually accurate, right? So you always need to take what AI gives you with a grain of salt. You always need to double check or review the responses. But again, it's a great way to, create that momentum and to do some get some initial feedback on things like research to really help you supercharge your timeline. So with all that being said, once you have your insights, then you have to start thinking about positioning. Positioning is really the space your brand owns or lives in your customer's head. So again, for car manufacturers, this is really, 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 really salient. So anytime I say the word Volvo to someone, the first thing they say back is safety, right? Oftentimes when I say the brand Toyota, reliable comes back, right? Like incredibly reliable. So really these are things that they landed based on their uncommon denominator. And but really it helps you frame the rest of the story. How do you tell a consistent story about not only the product that you're launching, but then the next 3 to 4 product launches after that, and even adjacent products, in a way that still ladders up into something that is um, contributing to owning that space, whatever that space might be. And then, one tool that is often used to help you sort of identify where the position that you do want to live in or that you want to own in the marketplace is something called a perception map. So it's very simplistic. You have an XY axis based on 2 important evaluation criteria in the eyes of your customer. In an ideal perception map, oftentimes you want to be in the top right-hand corner and you want to be you want a decent amount of space between you and your nearest competitor. But that's not always the case. But this is a really good tool of really understanding, hey, based on the uncommon denominator, based on your insights, what is the thing that you can uniquely own, right? In that market space. And then it sort of helps you evaluate, how unique that positioning is relative to the competition. You can often you can create, like, understand where all the different brands live on the space using surveys, or you can even just poll a lot of people in your office and sort of make a subjective call on where you live based on reviews and third-party research and whatnot too. So, but it's a really nifty tool. So now let's get into the value proposition. Again, this is something that I remember hearing. One of my first assignments was to create a value proposition. I had no idea what that was. I had to Google, like, well, or Bing. Actually, I think I was the first one I had to make was for Bing. So, Bing, what the definition was, and really, in a nutshell, it's the statement that clearly articulates why your target customer should buy or use your product versus the competition. That's really what it does. Oftentimes value propositions take a lot of different formats and shapes and forms, but really, if you cannot say, the push I always got from my old manager is, if you can't articulate why someone should buy your product over your competitors in 10 words or less, the rest of the sales could be an uphill battle. So that's the goal of what you need to try to do. So I wanted to bring this to life to show you a couple examples of what value propositions look like. So this is actually technically called a positioning statement, but it really does the best job of, that articulation of what a value proposition is. So if you look back, when Peloton debuted, I think just before COVID, like, their value proposition is, for busy parents who value fitness, Peloton brings a studio quality spin classes to the convenience of your home. Unlike traditional spin classes, Peloton offers live and on-demand classes tailored to fit your life anytime, anywhere. So you can prioritize your health without compromising family or work commitments. This is a very, very clear, statement of who they're for, busy parents or busy people who value fitness, the unique value they bring over the competition, and really articulates why they exist, why you should look into Peloton, as a fitness solution, right? And I just sort of added this one last minute just because this is near and dear to my heart. But this is a local company in my hometown of San Marino, California. And there's a place called Alice Computers where they sell you a computer. Often not for the cheapest price you can find it. You can find these computers for a lot cheaper on Amazon or Best Buy. But their value proposition is really, really clear, and they have a very, very good target audience, right? For older adults who need help with technology, but they feel anxiety or hesitance when they to bother their kids with all their tech problems. Alice Computer works as a trusted partner that provides on-demand, patient, and personalized tech support, oftentimes speaking, the language in my parents' case, Mandarin. So unlike big box retailers like Amazon and Best Buy, Alice Computers offers an approachable technicians who speak the language. They're down the street from you, and they help you feel confident and empowered to use your technology. I highly encourage my parents to buy all their computers and tech there, so they don't have to bother me and they don't have to feel that anxiety, right? So, anyways, I thought that was a good local example. And then really the next step is how does a messaging or how's the value proposition and positioning come to life? And this is called a messaging framework. This is something that I use almost every day in my, as a product marketer. But really, it's a great way to organize your thoughts and get everyone across the organization aligned on how you talk to the customer about your product to get them to lean in and want to learn more, consider and purchase your product, right? So in this, really it starts off with that again, that 10 words or less tagline. What are the first 10 words you would say to a prospective customer that will get them to lean in and say, "Ooh, I want to learn more." That sounds like it'll address a problem that I have. And then you walk them through sort of what we call through the value pillars. So the big areas of benefits that are backed up with reasons to believe. So these can be features or claims and whatnot. And they're usually structured from like your big, differentiation on the left all the way through to making sure that you sort of address common objections that they may have to the right. And it's really designed to flow like a conversation, right? So, for example, again, let's go back to the Microsoft Surface example. If I was to tell a mobile professional back in the day when this launched, like, hey, I have a product for you. It's a tablet that can replace your laptop. They lean in, they're really engaged. They're like, okay, tell me more. Well, hey, it's really versatile and thin. It's got great battery life. It's got an amazing typing experience. You can work, it also docks at two monitors. By the way, it's also faster than your MacBook Air. It has full Office capabilities and it has all the bells and whistles you love from your iPad, pen and touch, right? And then by the end of the conversation, hopefully they're, saying like, here's my money, please take it, give me this product. That's really the goal. But this, if you really look at this, if you look at the Microsoft Surface product landing page or website back in the day, that this is exactly how they framed that story. You would have seen all these different claims and pillars on their website. So, this really gives a unifying story, a way to tell a story to a customer across a lot of different mediums. And then so now that you have your positioning, value proposition, and messaging, right? Then the other question I get is, how do these things relate to each other? How do they ladder up to each other? Positioning is a long-term bet. This is something that you do for like a portfolio of products or even brand, for at the brand level that really, again, what is that space that you want to own? And it's something that you don't update very often, right? It's a long-term bet based on that, key insight, and you invest a lot to really own that space. A value proposition, on the other hand, is usually more on the, a specific product or even a specific product launch. And it's really something that, again, helps you understand why the customer should pick you over the competition. And that's updated semi-regularly, oftentimes as customer preferences shift or new competitive offerings become available. You'll need to update it. And those are also good pushes for the product team to, or, do, new focus releases to keep people engaged and see, continue that lead over your competitive products. And then finally, but a value proposition is not something, it's usually an internal document, an internal thing that customers don't really see. They see the messaging, right? Like that, just like what I just showed you. And that's updated regularly. So as new updates, new reasons to believe come out, as new bells and whistles come out, you update the messaging to make sure that everything's fresh and is still resonating with customers. So really to summarize, all these things are crucial to your go-to-market plan. If you don't have the key insights on what your customers care about relative to your company and your competition, uh, you won't be able to land the right positioning for the right target audience that will get someone to consider your product over the competition, and then you won't have good messaging that will actually land well with customers. So really, in a nutshell, it really starts with the customers. It really starts with the insight. That is incredibly crucial for a successful product launch. Once you have a lot of these things aligned, a lot of the other sort of nuances in the go-to-market plan fall into place. All right, so switching gears, let's talk about landing the product marketing job and also how do you advance yourself in a product marketing career. I actually ran into these stats recently. General Assembly did some research that shows that 48% of workers and 12% of leaders don't believe that entry-level workers are adequately prepared for the workforce, sort of reinforcing that sort of why I created the course slide earlier. And a lot of the reasons they cite is actually a lot of both the hard and the soft skills, right? The hard skills being, knowing, having like marketing fundamentals, but also I want to highlight that they also cite the soft skills with, things like collaboration, communication, and adaptability. And then also, and I've seen this a lot in my career too. There's not a lot of like once you're in the role, there's not a lot of great training. Managers oftentimes don't have enough time to invest, or they may not have just like a rich experience themselves. They might have come from another part of marketing and sort of fell into the role in a managerial or leadership role in product marketing. And there's just not a lot of great training assets out there. So things to keep. I think all this to say is, you need to be proactive in making sure that you're prepared to succeed in both the job search and advancing in the role. Similar to a slide I presented earlier, but like basically what I did is I summarized, I took 6 different product marketing job descriptions from companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Adobe, Google, etc., and really condense like what are the key responsibilities and requirements across these jobs. As you see here, again, a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, things like marketing research, being able to tell compelling stories, messaging, right? Being able to bring a product to market through sales assets and whatnot, and really collaborating across teams. These are really, in a nutshell, the key responsibilities that they have on all their job descriptions. As for the requirements, this is something that, it's just like a weird industry thing, but every time I see job requirements, I'm always skeptical because in my experience, I feel like hiring managers embellish this section to try to discourage a lot of the fair weather applicants from submitting, right? They always say that for an entry level role, you need 5+ years experience. Well, that's not technically an entry level role, but they do this to try to, make sure that they get, like weed out a lot of the people who might just apply just to apply. But really, what what are they looking for? In my experience, there's really 3 buckets. Like what is their evaluation criteria of what they're looking for in their next product marketing hire? One is, how are you a fit with their company culture? This is something that's pretty easy to hit, right? You can go online, you can look at their mission statement, you can look at their pillar, sort of their core beliefs or their pillars. But a lot of times they will have questions designed to have you demonstrate or talk about a time where you sort of personify or you actually lived, one of these company pillars. The second area is product marketing competency, right? So really Like, how do you think, do you have the product marketing chops to build a value proposition, to do customer research, to work with sales, to train them to sell the product effectively? So again, that's the second bucket. That's probably one of the most important buckets. And the last bucket is relevant industry experience, right? So is this if you're is this B2B versus B2C? Do you have is this a niche that has a lot of specific nuances that that other industries don't experience that are need to know? Things like that are really crucial, and that will increase the they'll be asking a lot of questions and looking for candidates that fill that. I will say that, in my career, actually for my last role in Microsoft Education, I was competing against a product marketing manager who had really deep education experience, but then but didn't have the product marketing experience I had. For that, you have to successfully figure out how to show the hiring manager how you're good enough, by demonstrating, for me, it was reading and citing case studies, educational case studies during my interview responses to really show them that I was deeply interested in education. And that was the ability to tip the scales over someone who was really deep in industry experience. So again, really think about how you can be good enough in some of these criteria, but really stand out in others in order to best prepare yourself for success. Really quickly, how does a typical product marketing interview happen? Well, it's like most other interviews. There's usually a set of behavioral questions, and sometimes there's situational questions. These behavioral questions are the tried and true, tell me a time that, tell me about a accomplishment you're particularly proud of, or a time that you worked with a difficult colleague, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of canned questions, and you can find a lot of information about that across the board. Situational questions, or AKA case questions, these are often asked when you don't have direct experience. So if you're looking to switch into a career in product marketing, or you're a product marketer looking to switch into another industry that has that specialization, then they'll start asking case questions that help, that sort of usually gives you a vague problem. But the whole purpose of it is to try to understand your thinking, your thought process of how you would solve that problem if you're asking the right questions. You're sort of there's a lot of times they're playing like buzzword bingo, where they're looking to make sure that you're checking and saying some of the keywords that are that they're looking for in a candidate. So again, this is probably the harder part to prepare for. And there's a lot of great resources out there to help you with that. One I'd recommend actually is called The Marketing Interview by Lewis Lynn. It's got a lot of great examples of the most common case interview questions for marketers and what a good response looks like. So again, to wrap up this section, think like a product marketer when you're doing your job search and when you're looking to get promoted, right? Find your uncommon denominator. What is the thing that's going to help you stand out from all the different candidates that are applying for the same role, or all the other product marketers in the org? What is going to be your superpower that's important to the hiring manager or to the organization that you can do better than the other candidates? And make sure that you tell stories about your accomplishments. Like, again, if you can't, anytime I see on a resume and in an interview, a very thoughtful response about what they did, sort of how they identified the problem, what kind of research they did to make sure that they had the right strategy, and then collaborated with a lot of different folks to bring that solution to life. And then knowing the impact they had on the organization or the company's bottom line. Those are the stories, those are the candidates that really stand out. So really think about what you've accomplished, not what you do, and make sure that you document that as much as possible. So with that, I think we're going to open up to questions. Brian, did you want to talk a little bit about the course itself?
Yeah, we can start off with questions here, and we can dive into dive into that specialization information about the specialization coming up a little bit thereafter. So again, if you have any questions about, and fantastic presentation too, by the way, thank you very much, Eric. That was incredibly informative and really spanning the the arc of all the incredibly useful insights, from on the job to trying to get the job. So that's great. Thank you for that. Again, if you have any questions for Eric, please use the Q&A and plug your question in, and we can have Eric answer that question. Waiting for that obligatory 10 seconds. Yeah, absolutely. There is a question about the presentation, about getting a copy of it. And yes, absolutely. You will receive a copy of the presentation, both in the slide deck form as well as a link to the recording. Yeah, thank you for that. See. So there's a question. Eric, I'm interested in transitioning into product marketing, but the years of experience has really been a barrier. How is experience doing another role like consulting viewed for somebody who wants to transition into product marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in my experience, like a lot, if you have consulting or any kind of related, again, if you think about like the product marketing chops and the vertical chops, if you have consulting experience, but it's in that industry that you're looking for a job in, that's going to really help paint that picture of what why they should consider you and really up your like help you stand out a little bit more in that. But yeah, the I like I said before, like the number of years in a job description is always artificially high. I think that's every job description. I always laugh that even in some of the when I was helping recruit for undergraduate interns, there's that 5+ year. I feel like it's just obligatory 5+ years of experience. I'm like, these kids are still in college. How are they even going to have these experiences? So I feel like don't be deterred by that requirement. If you feel like there's a good fit that you can bring value to that role, I would definitely apply. And I think networking is also another area that really helps you get a foot in the door, right? So anytime if you know someone at that company or ideally within the marketing org, but even like adjacent to that role, like and you can get an internal referral. A lot of times the recruiters will help you, make sure that you get that they actually take a good hard look at your submission, your resume, cover letter. I think all those things are really good, but I think it's again just really helping paint a story of how your consulting or previous experience like leads up into that role. The one thing I'll also say, so when I first moved from analytics to product marketing, I sort of I position myself as a data-driven marketer, right? So when I was in analytics, I did a lot of number crunching, made a lot of models, really understood KPIs, and also, did things with customer research and trying to make predictive models. What I after applying to some core product marketing roles, I started applying to sort of adjacent roles, so growth marketing roles, as still had the product marketing title on there, but it was technically a growth marketing team, and that's where I got my in, right? I leverage my analytics background and my passion for and deep interest for marketing, and that was able to get my foot in the door, able to get my role. I did that sort of product or data-driven marketing for about a year before they actually then gave me the opportunity to take on a more traditional strategic product marketing role. So hopefully that answers the question, or hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for that, Eric. And we'll just wait a minute or two here to see if there's any other questions that come in. Okay, we have another question here. So, do you see product marketing as a more strategic focused role or more execution oriented role or a blend of both?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think it's a blend of both, right? Obviously, earlier in your career, you'll do a lot more tactical, executional type of work, but the more that you can bring that strategic and also leverage those opportunities to build, a strategic mindset, be able to see the broader picture. I think it's only going to benefit you and your growth within it. I mean, even today Viant, the company I work in is, it's 350-person company, so we're pretty small. Yeah, and even in my role, I still, most of I say 60-70% of the work I do is really at that high level, strategic level. But I still have to roll up my sleeves and, help create sales assets every once in a while, or write website copy. So it's almost impossible to get away from the tactical. But I also get some enjoyment and fulfillment out of that too. So that's a lucky blend. But again, I think it's a sliding scale. As you progress in your career, you're going to see that, tactical versus strategic blend shift over time.
That's great. Thanks for that too, Garrick. We'll see if one more question comes in as we're about 6 minutes at the top of the hour. And it doesn't look like it just yet. Well, some great questions. I think we could transition here to talk a little bit before we end this evening's webinar. Would really like to draw your attention to the program again that Eric has talked about tonight. That it really came out of tonight's webinar. That the program that came out of it. So we're launching a specialization in product marketing here in January, and the specialization in 12 weeks in length. And after successfully completing this course, learners will be able to earn a digital badge that they can share online and a certificate. And in the program, you'll learn how to market products effectively, focusing on value communication, strategy design, and AI-driven marketing. If tonight's webinar was interesting to you, RSVP for one of the two information sessions coming up either on December 20th at 12 p.m. or on Wednesday, January 8th at 6 p.m. And Eric, I know you wanted to say a few words about what inspired you to develop this specialization.
Yeah, I stated some of that in the beginning, but really, this course is built for people, who are looking to switch careers into product marketing, or people who are early in their career to be able to be more successful and grow in the role. I really like I've really tried to accumulate a lot of the tools that have really helped me throughout my career, um, to help you succeed in both of those goals. So I really hope that some of you can join us come January.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks again, Eric. I appreciate that. So with that, we wanted to extend another thank you for joining our Expert Insights webinar. And thank you to Eric very much. Appreciate it. So stay tuned for a follow-up email in the coming week with a link to the slides and this recording, and keep learning with us. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.